Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Perkins. I'm here today to talk about the effectiveness of critical incident stress debriefing, critical incident stress management. Recently, in the news article, the value and the effectiveness of CISD and CISM interventions was brought under fire by a Tacoma-based psychologist by the name of Dr. Kirkpatrick. In this article, he made the following statements pertaining to myself. The CISD, critical incident stress debriefing, that Perkins teaches, doesn't address the memories that trigger PTSD, not the need to cognitively restructure how a person processes those memories. Instead, CISD says, don't talk about the memory, just talk about how you feel about it. He also said, there have only been a couple of reputable studies of critical incident stress debriefing, and they found either no benefit or that it worsened people's PTSD. Now, both of these statements made by the psychologist are ridiculously false and based on a total lack of foundational knowledge, a general lack of understanding of the concept and process of CISM, CISD, and its relationship to trauma. And additionally, the lack of ability to research the published studies, both positive and negative, from an unbiased perspective also fuels this distorted and inaccurate perspective of CISD. Now, first, let me address what CISD is and what it is not. CISD, critical incident stress debriefing, is a structured 7-step trauma intervention technique that is designed for properly trained personnel who follow proper protocol and procedures to assist a specific group of individuals. And that specific group of individuals primarily are those who are in the helping industry and emergency services field who have been exposed to a tragedy or a trauma. CISD is not therapy. CISD is not a cure. CISD is not psychotherapy, and CISD is not used to treat PTSD. The purpose of conducting a CISD has two main objectives. The first objective is to restore normal, healthy function to normal, healthy people in the aftermath of a tragedy. Well, what does that mean? Well, many times when people are exposed to a trauma or a tragedy, they can feel overwhelmed by the body's normal responses to experiencing such an event. And as a result, it can paralyze them from being able to do the everyday things and tasks, both in their personal life and in their professional lives. And the end result of a CISD is not to erase the memory of the incident, but rather to allow them to return to normal, healthy function that they enjoyed prior to exposure to that traumatic event. CISD does not necessarily eliminate symptoms that individuals may be experiencing, but rather mitigates the level of intensity of those symptoms to allow the person to return to the normal functions of daily life. CISD does not eliminate the need for further professional mental health interventions like psychologists, counselors, or peer support. Many people, though, after being exposed to a trauma and participating in a CISD, can return to their lives without any type of further intervention required. On the other hand, some people need more help and assistance, and the CISD facilitators in delivering a CISD provide resources and referrals for those people who require such help. It's actually part of the process. Now, the second objective of CISD is to promote cohesion of the group. CISD is a group intervention, and many times when members of a group are exposed to trauma, people will tend to withdraw from the group, lessening the effectiveness of the group and as well preventing healing from the incident in a group dynamic. Now, the notion that CISD is used as a PTSD treatment is totally false. CISDs are optimally delivered by a trained facilitator to a group within 24 to 72 hours of the traumatic event. PTSD diagnosis requires a minimum of 30 days in order to meet the criteria that's set out in the DSM or the diagnostic manual to be clinically diagnosed with having PTSD. So any reference that CISD is used to treat PTSD is inaccurate and false. There is a great deal of reputable published studies on CISD. In fact, there are 82 published studies that I have read personally. And of those 82 published studies, there are only 17 which report any negativity towards the effectiveness of CISD. And of those 17 negative studies, when you look at them carefully, you will see that the studies in their own documentation showed that they did not follow proper CISD procedures and protocols, that the CISDs were not performed by properly trained CISD facilitators, and many of them performed CISDs on individuals and not groups. And the individuals were not part of the demographic it was designed for. CISD was designed for emergency services personnel. Some of these negative studies, they did a CISD on a burn victim, one-on-one, not in a group, and not a member of the demographic to which CISD was actually designed for. So, point of fact, there are also an additional 52 published articles in magazines, journals, and books that document and support the concept, effectiveness, and efficacy of CISD and CISM. So if this was the case, then why did Dr. Kirkpatrick give this false information? Well, this is not the first time that he has spun this story, nor is it the first time that he's been corrected. Back in 2022, the State of Washington Criminal Justice Training Commission was preparing their annual report. They hired Dr. Kirkpatrick as a consultant to review the efficacy of CISD, which is widely used across the state of Washington for law enforcement officers. Dr. Kirkpatrick wrote a scathing 20-page report and submitted it to the Training Commission, only to have it reviewed by the Commission and have them comment, adding in the report his statement specific to the lack of successful research in the area of CISD, and this is what they wrote. On the contrary to the research presented above, positive articles supporting the use of CISD, CISM do exist. But if you embrace Dr. Kirkpatrick's point of view from this 20-page report, then surely he had an alternative to CISD, CISM services, which, by the way, these services were actually mandated by the state of Washington legislature. They passed a bill in April of 2020 to expand CISD, CISM services. So, did he have a solution to replace CISD? Oh, he most certainly did. He had a $7 million solution. $7,268,794 solution to be precise, to allow him to create an integrated network of psychologists, led, of course, by a program director at a salary of $175,000, to replace many of the CISD, CISM services that were being delivered by peer support. Other actual law enforcement officers that had experience in dealing with many of the critical incidents that police face on the daily. So anything even remotely positive about CISD or CISM would not only make him look bad, but also thwart the potential of his $7 million solution. Now, the other thing that was said in this article about that CISD doesn't encourage a person to talk about the memory, only how they feel about it, that is entirely false. CISD is a 7-step process. The second step in the process is to have the individual recount the traumatic event in great detail, to talk about it. So the notion that we only talk about how the person feels about it is entirely false. Now, keep this in mind. CISD is not the answer or the solution to all of the problems of trauma with the police and emergency services personnel who carry out their duties. It does not erase or treat the trauma, but it does allow people that are debriefed to get normal function back, if they are debriefed by properly trained individuals who follow the protocols and give debriefings to those individuals to whom this type of intervention was designed for, which is emergency services personnel. There are no studies that show harm was ever caused to an individual that was debriefed by people who were properly trained, followed the CISD protocol, and delivered it to emergency services personnel, again, whom it was designed for, nor is there any evidence that it ever worsened PTSD.